Hashtag the street that watched back. There is a road in Argentina that Google does not want you to see. Not because of what's on it, not exactly. Not because of the cracked pavement, or the faded stucco homes with their iron-barred windows, or the way the electrical lines sag between wooden poles like the threads of some enormous, patient web. These things are ordinary. These things belong to 1,000 small towns scattered across the Argentine interior, towns where the buses come twice a day if they come at all, where the nearest hospital is an hour's drive on a road that floods when it rains, where everyone knows your name and your mother's name and the name of the dog you had when you were 6. No. Google doesn't want you to see this road because of what was standing on it. Or, more precisely, because of who. I want to tell you this story carefully. I want to tell it slowly. Because I've spent the better part of 4 months trying to understand what I found, and the deeper I went, the less the ground beneath me felt like ground. I started this as a curiosity, a footnote I stumbled across in a forum thread about Google Street View anomalies. I assumed it would be a glitch. A stitching error. Maybe a prank by bored locals who spotted the camera car and decided to have some fun. I've seen those. We've all seen those. The horsehead masks, the staged crime scenes, the guy in rural Japan who followed the Street View car for miles on his bicycle, always appearing in the next frame like a ghost who couldn't let go. This is not that. This is something I cannot explain. And I no longer think I want to. Let me start with what we know. What is verifiable? What can be confirmed through cached data, metadata analysis, and the small but dogged community of researchers who noticed this anomaly before Google scrubbed it from the platform in late 2007. The town is called Coronel Allende. I need to say up front that this is not the name that appears in the original forum posts. The actual name of the town has been withheld, partly at the request of someone I spoke with during my research, and partly because, honestly, I'm not sure broadcasting it to an audience of this size is the right thing to do. People still live there. Children walk that street. Whatever happened, or didn't happen, these are real people, and the attention might do more harm than any truth I could offer. So. Coronel Allende. A town of roughly 800 people in the province of Santiago del Estero, which sits in the north-central region of Argentina, far from Buenos Aires, far from the tourist corridors of Patagonia and Mendoza. Santiago del Estero is one of the oldest provinces in Argentina, and also one of the poorest. The landscape is flat, dry, scrubby, a region called the Chaco, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, where the soil cracks in the heat and the rivers run brown when they run at all. It is a place that the modern world touches lightly, and often only in passing. Google's Street View cars reached Argentina in 2007, part of an aggressive global expansion that saw the company's camera-equipped vehicles dispatched to dozens of countries in rapid succession. The cars were a novel sight in Buenos Aires and Córdoba. In a town like Coronel Allende, they would have been extraordinary, a strange vehicle bristling with cameras, rolling slowly through streets where an unfamiliar car of any kind would draw stares. The Street View capture of Coronel Allende was, by all accounts, unremarkable. Dusty roads. A central plaza with a dry fountain. A church with a painted plaster facade. A few shops, a school, homes in various states of repair. If you had scrolled through the imagery in 2007, before it was removed, you would have clicked past most of it without a second thought. Except for Calle Velez. That's the name of the street, or at least the name I'll use. Calle Velez runs roughly north-south along the eastern edge of town. It's residential, perhaps 25 to 30 houses, most of them modest single-story structures with flat roofs and small front yards enclosed by low walls or fences. It's the kind of street where people sit outside in the evening because the houses hold the heat, where neighbors call to each other across the road, where nothing happens quickly and nobody expects it to. The Street View imagery of Calle Velez showed something that should not have been there. In front of every single occupied home on the street, and accounts vary on the exact number, but the most consistent figure is 22, a person was standing in or just outside the front doorway. Every one of them was wearing a white garment. Every one of them was facing the camera. Let that settle for a moment. Not some of them. Not a few people who happened to be outside. Every occupied home. 22 doorways. 22 figures in white. 22 faces turned toward the lens of a camera mounted on a car that was, according to its own metadata, passing through at 3:47 in the morning. 3:47 a.m. The first person to flag this, as far as I can determine, was a user on a now-defunct Argentine internet forum called Zonaforo. The post, dated November 14, 2007, was titled, and I'm translating loosely from the Spanish, "Has anyone else seen the people on Calle Velez?" The user, who went by the handle Diego TDF, described stumbling across the imagery while looking up his cousin's town on the newly launched Argentine Street View. His tone was casual at first, even amused. He mentioned the creepy people in white and asked if it was some kind of local tradition, a festival, or religious procession he wasn't aware of. He posted 2 screenshots. The thread received a handful of replies over the next few days. Someone joked about a cult. Someone else suggested it was a wedding, and the guests had lined up to watch the camera car pass. A reasonable explanation, except that no one could explain why every single person was positioned in their own doorway rather than gathered together, why they were all wearing the same garment, or why the timestamp read 3:47 a.m. while the imagery showed what appeared to be flat, ambient daylight, not sunrise light, not artificial light, but the kind of even, shadowless illumination you see at noon on an overcast day. That last detail is the one that hooked me. Because it's the detail that shouldn't be possible. Google Street View timestamps are generated automatically from the vehicle's GPS system and internal clock. They are synchronized regularly and are generally considered reliable. The timestamp on the Calle Velez imagery read 3 hours 47 minutes and 12 seconds, local time. Sunrise in that part of Santiago del Estero, at that time of year, the captures were made in September 2007, early spring in the southern hemisphere, would have been approximately 6:50 a.m. At 3:47 a.m., the street should have been in total darkness. Rural Argentine towns of that size have minimal street lighting. Some of the side streets have none at all. The image should have been black, or at best, a murky gray punctuated by the occasional porch light. Instead, the street is bathed in light. Clear, even, directionless light. The kind of light that doesn't come from a source, it simply exists, as though the air itself is gently glowing. The shadows are wrong, or rather, they're absent. There are no shadows. Not from the houses, not from the utility poles, not from the figures themselves. In every other street view capture from Coronel Allende, the plaza, the church, the other residential streets, the lighting is consistent with daytime conditions. Normal shadows. Normal sun angles. Only on Calle Velez does this anomaly appear. There are 3 possible explanations for the timestamp discrepancy. 1. The camera car's clock was wrong. Possible, but Google's systems are designed to prevent exactly this kind of error, and the timestamps on captures from nearby streets, taken presumably minutes before or after, show times consistent with normal daylight hours. 2. The metadata was corrupted or altered after capture. Possible, but no one has offered a coherent explanation for why Google would alter the timestamp to an impossible time, especially on imagery it later chose to remove entirely. 3. The timestamp is accurate and the capture was made at 3:47 a.m., which means the lighting conditions are unexplainable. None of these explanations is satisfying. All of them leave a door open that I would prefer to keep closed. The Zonaforo thread grew slowly through November and December of 2007. A few users began attempting to identify the figures, matching doorways to known addresses, cross-referencing with public records and social media profiles, which, in rural Argentina in 2007, were sparse at best. Most of the figures were too small in the imagery to identify clearly. The resolution of early Street View was significantly lower than what we're accustomed to today. Faces were blurred, partly by Google's emerging privacy filters and partly by the simple limitations of the camera technology. But there were exceptions. A user named Marcella Estrellas, who claimed to have family in the town, a claim I have not been able to verify, posted a message on December 3 that changed the trajectory of the thread entirely. She wrote, and again I'm translating, I showed the pictures to my aunt. She recognized the house at the corner of Valles and San Martin. She says the woman in the doorway is Señora Gutierrez. She says this is impossible because Señora Gutierrez died in 2004. The thread went quiet for 2 days. Then someone else came forward. Then another. Within a week, 3 of the figures on Calle Valles had been tentatively identified as residents who were deceased at the time of the September 2007 capture. The first was the aforementioned Señora Gutierrez, full name allegedly Rosa Elena Gutierrez de Figueroa, who had died of complications from diabetes in March 2004 at the age of 67. The second was a man identified only as Don Pascual, reportedly a widower who had lived alone at the southern end of the street and had died in his sleep sometime in 2002 or 2003, accounts differed, and I could not locate an official record. The third was a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, whom one user identified as a former neighbor's daughter who had died in a car accident on the national route outside of town in 2005. I need to be honest with you about the evidentiary standard here. These identifications were made by anonymous forum users based on low-resolution imagery of figures wearing garments that obscured much of their bodies and faces. None of the identifications were confirmed by official sources. No journalist, to my knowledge, investigated these claims at the time. The forum thread, which eventually reached several hundred posts, was a mixture of genuine curiosity, wild speculation, and the kind of performative credulity that internet discussions of the paranormal tend to attract. I cannot tell you with certainty that these figures were who the forum users claimed they were. What I can tell you is that 3 separate users, posting independently, identified 3 separate figures as deceased individuals, and that these identifications were not contradicted by anyone else in the thread, including other users who claimed familiarity with the town. In a community of 800 people, where everyone knows everyone, the absence of contradiction is not proof, but it is notable. By mid-December 2007, the Calle Valles imagery had been removed from Google Street View. No announcement was made. No explanation was offered. The captures simply vanished, replaced by a gap in coverage, a blank stretch on the map where Calle Valles should have been. The rest of Coronel Allende remained visible. Only the street with the figures was gone. The Zonaforo thread continued for a while after the removal, fueled by the screenshots that Diego TDF and a few others had saved. But without the original imagery to examine, the discussion gradually lost momentum. The forum itself went offline sometime in 2010, a casualty of the migration to social media platforms that consumed so many early internet communities. Fragments of the thread survive in the Wayback Machine, enough to reconstruct the timeline I've described, but not enough to recover all of the screenshots. Some of the cached pages are incomplete. Some show only text with broken image links, ghosts of evidence that no longer exists. I became aware of all this in early 2024, through a passing reference in a Reddit thread about obscure Street View anomalies. The user who mentioned it offered no links, no screenshots, just a brief summary. There's a town in Argentina where every person on a street was standing in their doorway wearing white, and some of them were dead. I almost scrolled past it. I wish I had. Instead, I spent the next several weeks tracking down every fragment I could find. The Wayback Machine caches of Zonaforo. A handful of screenshots that had been reposted to an Argentine paranormal blog in 2011, which itself was only partially archived. A single thread on a Spanish-language forum called Misterios del Sur, dating from 2009, in which a user recounted the Calle Valles story secondhand and included one screenshot I hadn't seen before, a wide-angle view of the street that showed, with stomach-turning clarity, the regularity of the figures' positioning. They were evenly spaced. Not casually, not approximately, evenly, as though measured. The distance between each figure and the next was almost identical, despite the varying sizes of the lots and the different setbacks of the houses from the road. This detail had not been discussed in the original Zonaforo thread, as far as I could tell from the surviving fragments. It's possible it was mentioned in portions of the thread that weren't cached. But the screenshot was clear. These figures were not simply standing in their doorways. They were arranged. I want to talk about the white garments. The forum users described them variously as robes, nightgowns, tunics, and shrouds. The low resolution makes it difficult to determine the exact nature of the clothing, but several things are apparent from the screenshots. The garments are loose-fitting and extend to approximately ankle length. They appear to be the same garment, the same cut, the same drape, the same shade of white. They are not hospital gowns, not bathrobes, not any commercially recognizable article of clothing. If I had to describe them in a single word, I would use the word shroud, and I choose that word with full awareness of its connotations. In the folk traditions of northwestern Argentina, which are a syncretic blend of Catholic practice, indigenous Quechua and Diaguita belief, and regional superstition accumulated over centuries, white is the color of death. Not of mourning, that's black, as in most Western traditions, but of death itself. Of the moment of transition. Of the body prepared for burial. In some rural communities, the dead are dressed in white before interment, a practice that has largely faded in urban areas but persists in the campo, the countryside, where the old ways run deep beneath the surface of modern life like underground rivers. I spoke to a professor of folklore at the Universidad Nacional de Tucumán. I won't name her, but she was generous with her time and appropriately skeptical of my inquiry. She told me that in certain communities in Santiago del Estero, there is a tradition, or perhaps, belief, is the better word, associated with what she called La Noche Blanca, the White Night. She was careful to note that this is not a well-documented phenomenon, not something you'll find in the standard academic literature on Argentine folklore. It exists in oral tradition, in the stories grandmothers tell, in the warnings that people half believe and half dismiss. She described it as a night on which the boundary between the living and the dead becomes permeable, not broken, not erased, but thin, like a membrane stretched too tight. On such a night, she said, the dead return to the places they knew, and they stand in the doorways of their homes, because the doorway is the threshold, the liminal space, the point of crossing. And the living, if they are wise, stay inside and do not look. I asked her if the living would also stand in their doorways. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, if the dead called them there, they would have no choice. I asked her what the dead would want. She said, to be seen. I sat with that answer for a long time. I'm still sitting with it. Let me return to the evidence. Let me return to what can be verified, or at least examined, because the alternative is to fall into the kind of speculation that I've spent this entire channel trying to resist. The screenshots. I have managed to locate and authenticate, to the degree that any digital artifact can be authenticated, 7 screenshots from the original Calle Velez Street View imagery. 2 were posted by Diego TDF in the original Zonaforo thread and survive in the Wayback Machine cache. 3 were reposted on the Argentine paranormal blog I mentioned earlier, and while they may be duplicates or crops of the originals, their metadata is consistent with screenshots taken from Google Maps in late 2007. 1 is the wide-angle shot from the Misterios del Sur forum. And 1 was sent to me directly by someone who contacted me after I posted a brief inquiry on a subreddit dedicated to Argentine internet history. This last screenshot is the most detailed, and it is the one that keeps me awake at night. It shows a section of Calle Velez from approximately the midpoint of the street, facing south. 4 houses are visible, 2 on each side of the road. In front of each house, in the doorway, stands a figure in white. The figures on the left side of the street, the eastern side, appear to be women. The figures on the right side appear to be a woman and a man. The resolution is low, the faces are blurred, but the postures are visible, and it's the postures that disturb me most. They are not standing naturally. They are not standing the way a person stands when they've come to the door to see what's happening outside. There's no lean, no tilt of the head, no hand raised to shield the eyes or resting on the doorframe. They are standing with their arms at their sides, their feet together, their shoulders square to the road. They are standing the way a person stands when they are being presented. when they are on display. And they are all 4 of them, in this screenshot, and all 22 of them, across the available imagery, facing the exact direction of the camera. Not the direction the camera car was coming from. Not the direction it was going. The exact direction of the camera at the moment of capture. As though they knew not only that the car was there, but precisely where the lens was pointed. As though they had oriented themselves to it. As though they wanted to be sure that when the image was assembled, when the pixels resolved, when some stranger on the other side of the world sat at their computer and dragged their cursor along this unremarkable street in this unremarkable town, the figures would be looking directly into their eyes. You felt it, haven't you? That sensation when you're scrolling through Street View in some far-off place and you come across a person who happens to be looking at the camera, and for just a moment, the illusion collapses, and you feel seen. It's a flicker, a half-second of irrational discomfort, and then you scroll on and forget about it. Imagine that feeling multiplied by 22. Imagine every door, every face, every pair of eyes. Imagine the silence that a photograph implies, because a photograph is always silent, but some photographs make you aware of the silence, make you feel it pressing against the screen like a held breath. That is what the Calle Velez imagery feels like. Even in low resolution. Even through screenshots of screenshots. Even now, years later, in the safety of my office, with the lights on and the door closed. It feels like being watched by something that has been waiting a very long time to be seen. In February 2024, I attempted to contact residents of the town. I won't describe this process in detail, partly to protect the privacy of the individuals involved and partly because it was largely fruitless. Rural communities in Santiago del Estero are not eager to speak with strangers about strange things. The culture is one of discretion, of keeping certain matters within the community, of understanding that some things are not meant to be explained to outsiders. I respect this. I understood it going in. But I made the attempt. I reached 3 people willing to talk. One was a man in his 50s who had moved away from the town in 2010 and now lived in Córdoba. He remembered the Street View car passing through but claimed not to have seen the imagery online. When I described what the screenshots showed, he was quiet, and then he said something that I wrote down immediately: "Eso no me sorprende, pero no quiero hablar de eso." That doesn't surprise me, but I don't want to talk about it. The second was a woman who had grown up in the town and still had family there. She was more willing to talk, though she spoke in circumlocutions and half-statements, as though approaching the subject directly would be dangerous. She confirmed that Calle Velez was known in the town. She used the word marcada, which means marked, and that older residents avoided walking on it after dark. She said this had been the case for as long as she could remember. When I asked why, she said that her grandmother had told her the street was older than the town. That the town had been built around it. That the street had been there before any of the houses, before the church, before the Spanish, before anyone. She said her grandmother called it El Camino de los que vuelven, the road of those who return. The third person was a young man, perhaps 25, who had found my Reddit post and reached out via direct message. He was from the town and still lived in the province, though not in Coronel Allende itself. He was the one who sent me the 7th screenshot. His message was brief and blunt. He said his mother had lived on Calle Velez in 2007. He said she was one of the figures in the imagery. He said she had no memory of it, no memory of going outside, no memory of putting on a white garment, no memory of standing in the doorway. She had gone to bed that night and woken up the next morning, and everything was normal, except that her feet were dirty, as though she had been standing on the unpaved ground in front of the house, and there was a white garment folded neatly on the kitchen table that she had never seen before and did not recognize. She kept the garment, he said. She folded it and put it in a drawer and never wore it. He asked her about it once, years later, and she told him not to touch it. She told him it wasn't hers. I asked him whose it was. He said, she told me it belonged to whoever she was going to be. I don't know what that means. I've turned it over in my mind hundreds of times, and I don't know what it means. But it settles into a place below thought, below reason, into the part of you that understands things before you have words for them, and in that place, it makes a kind of terrible sense. I want to address the obvious questions. I want to address the possibility that this is a hoax, a fabrication, a collective exercise in digital folklore, because that possibility is not only reasonable, it is arguably the most likely explanation. Consider, the original forum posts are anonymous. The screenshots could have been fabricated using image editing software, even in 2007. The identifications of the deceased individuals were made by anonymous users and never verified. My 3 contacts could have been lying, or mistaken, or playing along with a narrative that had taken on its own momentum. The folklorist's account of La Noche Blanca could be an invention, or an exaggeration, or a tradition so local and so oral that it exists more as a story people tell than as something people actually believe. The Google removal could have been routine. The company regularly removes imagery that contains identifiable individuals in compromising or unusual situations, and 22 people standing in their doorways at what the system logged as 3:47 a.m. would certainly qualify as unusual. I have considered all of this. I have turned each piece of evidence over, examined its seams, tested its weight. And I cannot tell you with certainty that any single element of this story is true. But I can tell you what it feels like when you hold all the pieces together. When you sit with them in the dark and let them arrange themselves in your mind. It feels like looking at a door that is slightly ajar. Not open, open would be honest, would be an invitation or a threat. Ajar. Offering just enough of a gap to suggest that something is on the other side. Something that is standing very still. Something that is waiting for you to push the door the rest of the way open, or to walk away, or to simply stand there, frozen, unable to do either. Let me tell you about one more thing I found. It's the detail that made me decide to make this video, and it's the detail that almost made me decide not to. The wide-angle screenshot, the one from the Misterios del Sur forum, showing the full length of the street, has been examined by several people over the years, mostly amateur analysts in paranormal forums. In 2012, a user on an image analysis board ran the screenshot through a contrast enhancement process, attempting to pull detail from the darker areas of the image, the interiors of the doorways behind the figures. In most cases, the doorways were simply dark. The camera's dynamic range couldn't penetrate the shadows inside the houses. But in 3 of the doorways, and I need you to hear this, in 3 of the doorways, the contrast enhancement revealed a second figure. Standing behind the first. Deeper in the house. In the hallway or the front room. Also wearing white. Also facing the camera. But taller, somehow, or further back, or both. It's hard to tell from the resolution. The 3 doorways where the second figures were visible were not grouped together. They were dispersed along the street, one near the northern end, one near the middle, one near the south. And here is the part that I almost didn't include, because it sounds too perfect, too narratively convenient, and I am aware of how that looks. The 3 doorways with the second figures correspond, according to the Zonaforo thread's tentative identifications, to the 3 homes of the deceased residents. The homes of Rosa Elena Gutierrez de Figueroa. Don Pascual. The young woman killed on the national route. In each of those doorways, there were 2 figures. The one in front, identified as the dead resident. And one behind, unidentified, standing in the darkness of a house that should have been empty. I don't know who the second figures are. No one does. The contrast-enhanced images are grainy, ambiguous, open to interpretation. You could argue that they're artifacts of the enhancement process, pareidolia, the eye finding patterns in noise. You could argue that. I've tried to argue that. At 3 in the afternoon, with sunlight coming through my window and the sound of traffic outside, I can almost convince myself. At 3:47 in the morning, I cannot. There's one more thing. After the young man sent me the screenshot and told me about his mother, I asked him if anything had changed on Calle Velez since 2007. If the street felt different. If the people who lived there had noticed anything. He took a long time to respond. When he did, his message was short. He said that in the years since the Street View car passed through, 7 residents of Calle Velez had died. He said this was not unusual, people die, especially in a town with an aging population and limited healthcare. But he said that each of the 7 had been found in the same place, in their front doorway, as though they had gotten up in the middle of the night and walked to the door and simply stopped. He said that in each case, the person was wearing their normal sleeping clothes, except for one detail. Their feet were clean. Perfectly clean, as though they had not walked across the floor of their own home to reach the door. As though they had been placed there. As though they had been set down, gently, carefully, in the threshold of the house that had been theirs, facing the street, facing the place where the camera had been, facing the direction from which something had looked at them and, in looking, had done something to them that didn't have a name. I asked him if the bodies were facing the street. He said yes. I asked him if their eyes were open. He said yes. I asked him what they were looking at. He didn't answer. Not that night. Not the next day. I sent a follow-up message a week later. It was marked as read. He never responded. I went to Google Maps. I went to the place where Coronel Allende should be. The town is there, the plaza, the church, the school. The Street View coverage has been updated several times since 2007, with newer, higher-resolution imagery. You can walk the virtual streets and see ordinary life, cars parked in driveways, children on bicycles, laundry hanging on lines. It looks like any other small town. But Calle Velez is still blank. Not blurred, not restricted, blank. A gap in the coverage. If you try to drop the Street View icon on that street, it doesn't connect. The blue lines that indicate available imagery stop at the intersections on either end. The street itself is a void, a rectangle of empty gray in the middle of a fully mapped town. As though it doesn't exist. As though Google's cameras cannot see it, or will not see it, or have been told not to look. Or as though something on that street does not wish to be seen again. Not yet. Not until it is ready. Not until every doorway is filled. I think about the folklorist's words. About the dead returning to be seen. About the doorway as the threshold, the liminal space, the point of crossing. I think about the figures standing with their arms at their sides, their feet together, their faces turned toward a camera that should not have been there at an hour when nothing should have been visible. I think about the light, that impossible, sourceless, shadowless light, and I wonder if it was the camera that illuminated the street or if it was the street that illuminated itself, briefly, for the camera's benefit. As though it wanted to be recorded. As though it wanted proof that it had happened. As though whatever stands in those doorways in the middle of the night understands, somehow, that we have built machines that can see in the dark and carry images across the world and store them in servers where they will persist long after the people in them are gone. And I think about the second figures. The ones in the shadows. The ones standing behind the dead. Because if the figures in the doorways are the residents, living and dead, standing together, dressed in white, facing the camera, being seen, then who is behind them? Who is deeper in the house? Who is standing in the dark hallway of a home that should be empty, wearing white, facing forward, waiting? I don't have an answer. I'm not sure there is one, not one that can be spoken aloud, not one that can be typed into a script and read into a microphone and compressed into an audio file and uploaded to a platform where it will be consumed by thousands of people in the safety of their own homes, in their own doorways, in the small hours of the morning when the world is quiet and the screen is the only light. But I want you to do something for me. It's a small thing. It will seem strange. The next time you're scrolling through Google Street View, and you will, because we all do, because there's something irresistible about the ability to stand on a street you've never visited and see it as though you were there, the next time you're clicking through some quiet road in some small town you'll never go to, I want you to pay attention to the doorways. Not the buildings, not the landscapes, not the cars or the street signs or the curious details that make Street View such an endlessly fascinating and occasionally unsettling experience. The doorways. Look at who's standing in them. Look at how they're standing. Look at which direction they're facing. And if you find a street where every door is occupied, where every figure is turned toward you, where the light seems wrong and the shadows are missing and the timestamp makes no sense, close the tab. Close it immediately. Do not screenshot it. Do not share it. Do not go back. Because I think the folklore has it backward. I don't think the dead return to be seen. I think they return to see. And I think the cameras gave them eyes. I think Calle Velez has always been there, in every town, in every country, in every quiet place where the road runs straight and the houses stand in rows and the doors open onto the street like mouths. I think it's there right now, tonight, in the town nearest to you, in the town you grew up in, on the street you lived on as a child. And I think that if you walked outside at 3:47 in the morning and stood in your doorway and looked down the road, you might see them. All of them. Standing in their doorways. Wearing white. Watching. And behind them, in the darkness of each house, something taller, something patient, something that has been waiting since before the town was built, since before the road was paved, since before anyone lived there at all, something that understands that a doorway is not an entrance or an exit but a frame. A frame for a picture. A picture of a person standing still. Standing forever. Looking out at a road that leads nowhere, that has always led nowhere, that exists only to be seen from a great distance by someone who will never set foot on it but who will carry the image with them long after they've closed the tab, long after they've forgotten the name of the town, long after they've convinced themselves it was a glitch, a hoax, a trick of the light. The image persists. The figures remain. The doorway is open. And somewhere, on a server farm in a climate-controlled building in a city you've never heard of, the photograph still exists. The one Google deleted. The one that shows a street in a small town in the Argentine interior, lit by a light that has no source, populated by people who should not have been standing, wearing garments that belong to the dead. It's still there. It's always been there. And every time you open Google Maps and zoom in on a place you've never been, every time the street view loads and the image assembles itself pixel by pixel, there's a fraction of a second, just a fraction, just a breath, where the system decides what to show you. Where the algorithm selects the image, the angle, the moment. And in that fraction of a second, before the image resolves, before you see the ordinary street with its ordinary houses and its ordinary light, I wonder what the camera saw first. I wonder what was standing in the doorway before the software decided you weren't ready to see it. I wonder if it's still there. I wonder if it's looking at you. Some streets are older than the towns built around them. Some doors open in both directions. Some photographs show you exactly what was there, and what was there is worse than anything you could have imagined because it is not imaginary. It is real, and it is patient, and it has been standing in that doorway since before you were born, waiting for a camera, waiting for a screen, waiting for a pair of eyes on the other side of the world to look, finally, in its direction. Now you have. Now it knows your face. Sleep well tonight. And if you wake at 3:47, as I have, as I do, as I suspect I always will, don't go to the door. Don't look outside. And whatever you do, don't check to see if anyone is standing there. Because the answer was decided a long time ago, on a street in Argentina, in a light that had no source, at an hour when the whole world should have been dark. The doorway is open. It has always been open. And it is not empty.